Hello, welcome to Endemic Times. My name is Amira, and we're just going to get right into it. There have been some bombshell revelations that have come out regarding the Uvalde shooting, the police response, faulty equipment, a lack of protective gear. It's the gambit. So let's get into it. The school district police chief who was leading the response to the May 24th shooting appeared to be agonizing over the length of time it was taking to secure the shields that would help protect officers when they entered and to find a key for the classroom. Chief Pete Arredondo and others at the scene became aware that not everyone inside the classrooms was already dead, the documents showed, including a report from a school district police officer whose wife, a teacher, had spoken to him by phone from one of the classrooms to say she had been shot. More than a dozen of the 33 children and 3 teachers originally in the 2 classrooms remained alive during the 1 hour and 17 minutes from the time the shooting began inside the classrooms to when 4 officers made entry, law enforcement investigators have concluded. By that time, 60 officers had assembled on scene. One of the things revealed in this New York Times article into this investigation is that Chief Arredondo was apparently heard to be saying, "People are going to ask why we're taking so long," according to a transcript of officer's body camera footage. "We're trying to preserve the rest of the life. We think there are some injuries in there," the man believed to be Chief Arredondo said several minutes before the breach, according to the transcript. "And so you know what we did? We cleared off the rest of the building so we wouldn't have any more, besides what's already in there, obviously." Some of the officers who first arrived at the school had long guns, more firepower than previously known, and Chief Arredondo learned the gunman's identity while inside the school and attempted in vain to communicate with him by name through the closed classroom doors. So this is a big area where we are receiving very different accounts, it seems, on a day-by-day basis regarding this shooting, the police response, who was actually there, and just the overall situation that occurred. At first, we were told that there was a resource officer on site that engaged with the gunman. That is not true. Now we're being told that they did have long guns, which was the firepower that would be necessary to take out an active shooter, which they tried to say earlier that they didn't, which was why they didn't engage and which was why they needed to delay doing anything with this active shooter, on the aspect that they didn't have adequate firepower, which here we're now learning they did. Chief Arredondo, who had earlier focused on evacuating other classrooms, began to discuss breaching the classrooms where the gunman was holed up for about an hour after the gunfire started inside the school at 11:33. He did so after several shots could be heard inside the classrooms after a long lull, around 12:21. "If there's kids in there, we need to go in there," one officer could be heard saying, according to the documents. Another responded, "Whoever is in charge will determine that." Now we're learning that Chief Arredondo is saying that he did not believe that he was in charge of the multi-agency response that day. He didn't think he was directing the response, and he's saying that he was acting as a first-line responder instead. But the Department of Public Safety had previously described him as being the commanding officer that day. So again, more conflicting reports, more misinformation, and more "how are we supposed to believe anything you say if you continue to obfuscate and obviously lie to us about every detail?" Another thing found in this New York Times report is that investigators found that not only did an exterior door through which the gunman entered fail to lock, but most of the school's interior doors, including those on classrooms, could not be immediately locked in the event of an emergency. This is becoming one of the key talking points of both the Uvalde Police Department and just kind of police departments in general. They're really trying to put the onus on the classrooms and the schools to become more prison-like, having guards outside, on the sides, locking all of the doors and the windows. There is such a huge concern that putting children into that kind of an environment is not going to give them an adequate place to learn, which is why they are going to school, to learn and to develop and to make friends. You cannot put children in that kind of militaristic or even prison-like environment. It's going to cause more problems down the road. As we're seeing here, this was more of a failure in the response of the Uvalde Police Department, not the school itself. One of the more astounding revelations that came from this New York Times article is that The radios on the police officers of Uvalde were not working on site. In the wake of the shooting, investigators tested the radios carried by the Uvalde Police Department as well as by Chief Arredondo's school police force and found that they did not transmit effectively inside the school or even just outside of it. Only the radios carried by Border Patrol agents appeared to function well, the review found. Chief Arredondo arrived at the scene without any radio at all and used a cell phone for some communications. It was not clear if he ever received a radio. This is both mind-boggling and baffling and just such a despicable failure of epic proportions that their radios were not working. Shows that not only is this equipment that they have faulty, but they are not following standard basic protocols of ensuring that your equipment works. Because you always want to make sure that your stuff works before a disaster takes place. It wasn't like this was something brand new to them. They had had training just months before. All of this should have been worked out, could have been worked out if someone was following the right protocol. It begs the question, what are they using their monetary budget for? And if it's not for good, clear radios that are used on the school premises for which they are to protect, then what is it going towards? Another area that we are continuing to get conflicting reports from the Uvalde Police Department, and at this point pretty much just no information at all, is the timeline of events. Because we continue to get such conflicting reports, it is really hard to ascertain whether or not we are being told the truth. One of the teachers, Miss Morales, her husband, Ruben Ruiz, worked for Chief Arredondo as one of the 6 uniformed officers of the Uvalde School District's police department. He rushed to the school when his wife called and said that she had been shot. And it is now clear from the documents that he informed the responders on scene that his wife was still alive in one of the classrooms. She says she is shot. Officer Ruiz could be heard telling other officers as he arrived inside the school at 11:48. And that message appeared to have reached a sergeant from the Uvalde Police Department who was near Chief Arredondo inside of the school. These are key timeframes to keep in mind because the shooter began shooting at 11:30. That was when the first shots were fired. 11:48 is when Officer Ruiz and others were on site and had notified first responders that there were injuries and people were still alive. So that's 10 minutes. But this is now the starting point of that supposed lull of there's no shooting and it doesn't seem like there's any communication going on. So for 40 minutes, there were known injuries and no response. That is another really critical area that we have been misinformed by the Uvalde Police Department, because their initial reports was that they were trying to say that they did not know of any injuries, and clearly they did. It wasn't until 12:46 that Chief Arredondo gave his approval to enter the room. If y'all are ready to do it, you do it. Now, in other reports, as we've heard, it was the Border Patrol officers that had come on scene, saw the complete disarray, and decided that they were just going to go ahead and do this. Apparently, when those Border Patrol officers decided to just go ahead and move forward, it was apparently at the same time of Chief Arredondo saying, go ahead and do it. The Border Patrol officers, though, did not hear. They didn't have that information relayed to them. They just kind of went ahead, said, screw it, we're going in, because they could see this lack of response that was going on. There's obviously a lot of missteps, a lot of miscalculations, and unfortunately, a serious lack of information that we are being given, that we should be given, because these were 19 children and 2 adults that were killed in this shooting, and not all of those children would have died had Chief Arredondo and the other officers had better equipment, a better response time, and just gotten off their asses and done the job of being a hero to save children. One of the big things that comes from talking about police, their response, their ability to do the kind of work that they need to do, it always comes down to their budgets and then the schools looking like prisons practically. Well, for Uvalde, which has roughly 16,000 residents, the $4 million police budget is the biggest expense in the city budget this year, funded at a proportion that's higher than some peers, but far from abnormal. Because it's very common in very small towns, which Uvalde is, that the bulk of budgets will go to the police because they don't have other services that are available, like mental health services and things like that. So that is why Uvalde has spent close to 40% of its total budget on policing for the last 7 out of 8 years. There should be no issues with radios. There should be no issues with tactical gear being available to officers. There should be no issues with getting your asses on that site and taking this shooter out. But they're going to continue to say that they don't have enough money and that they don't have enough resources. But as we can see from here, that's absolute bullshit. If you need better radios, then you can get better radios. You have the money in your budget. And if you don't have the money in your budget for adequate functioning radios, then what is your budget going to? And again, there's a lot of rhetoric going on right now from the pro-police front that they want to harden schools. They want to make them more difficult to get in and out of in these active shooter situations. That's going to be really difficult for children, where this is supposed to be an institution for learning. It's not for a lack of security measures, it's not for a lack of funding, and it certainly isn't for a lack of just overall trying from these teachers, because we have heard from both Uvalde and other very unfortunate shootings that have happened at schools. It is so often the teachers that put their lives on the line for their students, and they are not police officers. They shouldn't be police officers. A teacher shouldn't have to carry a gun in a classroom for this fear that a shooter is going to arrive on a school when there's officers on site, when there's officers that are there that are supposed to be serving and protecting their community. In Uvalde, they had all of the security measures in place, which included its own police force, threat assessment teams at each school, a threat reporting system, social media monitoring software, fences around schools, and a requirement that teachers lock their classroom doors, according to the security plan posted on the district's website. The schools have done everything that they can to mitigate these unfortunate situations that continue to happen across the country at schools. It is now on the officers. It is on the police officers to respond. And if they do not want to respond, then let the parents go in. Let the good Samaritans that are willing to give their life for children. Because if you're a police officer and you're not willing to put your own life on the line for babies, you shouldn't be a police officer. And lastly, some other really weird things that are contradictory to what we would have been initially told on the day of the shooting and now 2 to 3 weeks past. We were told that they weren't sure if the door was locked or not. Now we're being told it was locked, and Chief Arredondo apparently tried using 26 keys to open it, but none of them worked. Now, I'm not a police officer. I am not an expert. But where's like a battering ram? We see this kind of shit in the movies all of the time. We are given such propaganda when it comes to what we believe the police should do and what they actually do. Because let's face it, if you're in a situation, if you're an adult that sees that there is an active shooter on an elementary school grounds, if you're not willing to do everything that you need to do to pound that door down, then what the hell good are you? These officers failed at every step. It's not really about guns. It's not about good people with guns. And it's not about hardening the schools. The question becomes, why are we funneling the amount of taxpayer dollars into these police budgets, some that are higher than other nations' militaries, if they are not going to act, if they are not going to respond? The solution is not hardening schools or giving teachers guns. The approach needs to happen on multiple fronts. Does gun control need to happen? Yes. Do we need to have stricter laws and enforcement of those laws when it comes to purchasing guns? Yes. But do we also need to address the systemic issues in our country that are continuing to create the circumstances that lead to very ill individuals that decide this is the way to go? This is a multi-pronged issue which needs a multi-pronged approach. Another thing to keep in mind is that these officers, whether or not they agree with how this response went down, they're going to protect each other. This is a club, and we are certainly not in it. So thank you so much for watching. As more of this comes out, I will get as much as I can and provide it to you. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And just remember, we're all human, we're all on a unique journey, and the best way for us to move forward positively is to have these kinds of conversations, as difficult as they may be. Stay safe, take care, and remember to be kind to each other.